morning, everybody, and wonderful to see so many friends here this morning to meet with our guests, Mary O'Donnell and Geraldine O'Reilly, and we're here to discuss Unlegendary Heroes. I think a number of you have managed to visit the exhibition upstairs, which consists of woodcuts by Geraldine in response to 10 poems she selected from Mary's works over the years. Just to give you a brief introduction to our guests this morning, Geraldine O'Reilly is a visual artist and printmaker. She's a graduate of the National College of Art and Design. She was awarded a Fulbright scholarship to New York in 1989 to research Irish emigration to America for her exhibition, Journal. She has had many solo exhibitions and shown to selected group exhibitions throughout Ireland, America, Australia, France, Belgium, Sweden, England and Poland. A former board member of Graphic Studio Dublin and elected chairperson in 2008. In 2004, she was elected to Éas Dóna for her contribution to the arts in Ireland. In 2007, O'Reilly was shortlisted for the Golden Fleece Award. We know her well in County Laois in the Dunamay's Art Centre, as she has been curator and exhibitor for the exhibition Plate, Paper, Print at the Dunamay's. It featured 10 printmakers from Graphic Studio Dublin, and the exhibition opened in January 2019 and ran until the end of February. O'Reilly was awarded a Westmeath County Council art grant for the project, and she created a limited edition etching for the exhibition based on the poems of Seamus Heaney, which opened in Italy. In 2020 and 2021, Geraldine created 10 illustrations to accompany poems by the poet and writer Mary O'Donnell. The series titled Unlegendary Heroes is available as a limited edition box set of screen prints, and the prints were printed at the Graphic Studio Dublin. The project was launched at the end of 2021 and it is presently on exhibition in the Dunamay's Art Centre. Mary O'Donnell is a poet and novelist and short story writer. She has published 8 collections of poetry, from Reading the Sunflowers in September in 1990 through to Those April Fevers in 2015, and her most recent, Massacre of the Birds, in 2020. She's had many fiction novels, The Light Makers, Where They Lie, and a short story collection, Storm over Belfast. Her essay, My Mother in Drumlin Country, published in New Hibernia Review during 2017, was listed among the notable essays and literary non-fiction of 2017 in Best American Essay. The title poem of this exhibition, Unlegendary Heroes, features in the American Foundation's poetry website, along with other works by O'Donnell. This poem also appears in Windharp, Poems of Ireland since 1916, and was developed as a performance piece for the Irish Consulate in Boston's Women's Voices in Modern Irish Poetry in November 2020. Her 5th novel has been completed and is represented by the agent Marion Gunn O'Connor. She's an active member of Ireland's Affiliation of Artists, Éas Dóna. In 2020, the other piece, I beg your pardon. The 10 poems in which O'Reilly responds so vividly are taken from 3 different collections of Mary's poetry, dealing with aspects of female life and experience, and include one of her most essential and defining poems, Unlegendary Heroes, often cited and quoted from. We are going to hear about the journey that our 2 artists encountered, how it evolved, how the project came to fruition, and how the poems were selected by Geraldine in putting this work together, because Geraldine was the starting point of this particular project. Will we start with the poem, maybe, before we descend on the questions of how the work was chosen? Will we do that?
Yeah,
and
sure.
Will we take the poem Wicklow as our opening poem,
all
please,
right.
Mary?
Yeah. I absolutely love the the image that goes with this, as you'll see or maybe have seen already upstairs. Like it continues to astound me that the desolate places of Wicklow and other parts of Leinster perhaps contain undiscovered women's bodies. And so this poem is dedicated to some of those who have disappeared. Deirdre Jacobs, Annie McCarrick, Jojo Dullard, Muireann Rostas, and the many missing women buried in Wicklow and in the Irish Midlands. Now we know all about that from recent events as well. And it continues. And before I read, the body of Muireann Rostas, she was a young Romanian girl, and it was recovered. But during the trial, one witness described how he and his companion danced on their body after they threw it in the grave. So, anyway, this is a response, and it's quite dispassionate in its way. Up here, a sky full of air and no sound. This is the safest place, their hidey hole and dumping ground, so deep, so dark. This is where they park, then leave no trace, depart again with bats and bricks, fists, hammers, chisels. One way or another, it is all about silence. And when a storm surges on the mountain, it's still about silence and claws of lightning that strike and split a tree, an upright post in a sloping field of sheep. The next morning, worms of light wriggle through heather, fondle globes of dew. Deer graze in the valley, streams overrun banks, spread silver cloaks along the grass, as if this was the garden of innocence. Deeper still, the big house at Lugala, a falconry, another cloud-dark lake, hours spent with tasselled birds on the long rain, haughty queen kestrels out and back, grasping for fresh meat to tear, devour. But up high, cars drone the night beyond Sally Gap, higher, more distant, drive steadily through the dun light. Fog rolls across waiting slopes when they decide to dig, to bury, to sometimes dance on a nuisance grave above the body of the woman they want rid of. For this is the safest place, their hidey hole and dumping ground, so deep, so dark, one way or another, it is all about silence.
Thank you, Mary. Very much, very poignant and very much of so important a poem and so relevant today. Geraldine, can I turn to you there and just ask you how you chose to undertake this project and maybe why you undertook to choose it?
Well, it goes back a long time because when I was starting out, I worked for the director of the Tyrone Guthrie at the time, Bernard Loughlin, back in the 80s. And I was organising an arts festival for County Monaghan, and I was putting on a poetry reading. That was one of the events I was putting on. And I think I had Dermot Healy and Leland Bardwell. And Bernard Loughlin, the director of the Tyrone Guthrie, said to me, "Oh, we'll include this up-and-coming young Monaghan poet, who was Mary O'Donnell." So that was my first introduction. So she always kind of stuck in my head, even though I didn't know her at the time, but something connected in my head. And then years later, like we've met a number of times at the Tyrone Guthrie Centre, but I did something with another poet, and I think Mary said something like that she would have liked if I had worked with her. And that always stuck with me as well. And I don't know, just one day, I think, did I ring you up?
I can't remember. I think it was face to face, really. I don't know which of us said we should do something together.
I just said, would you like to do it? I mean, I didn't have any finances or anything like that, but it was always sort of in the back of my mind that I would love to work with her. And so I just said, let's do it.
And I had seen, at a later stage, I was in the Tyrone Guthrie Centre, and I was up in one of the upper rooms, and it was in very cold, snowy weather, and I was, tapping through this novel as you do, and sometimes bored out of my head and wondering, what do I do next? And I'd look out the window, and there in the middle of all the sleet swirling around was Geraldine O'Reilly outside drawing. And I thought, wow, this is, she's keeping at it. And it sort of, it inspired me. I remember one particular day, and I said, come on, OD, get back to it, And so we talked and everything at dinner and all that.
Yeah, and then Mary started sending me poems. So, there wasn't any, when I picked the poems because I liked them. But it's just very interesting after I picked the 10 poems that now, when I look through them, there is actually themes. They're all about women, really, at different stages. Mostly contemporary sort of issues and so on, And it's funny how it's formed it's almost a little volume in its own, isn't it? The 10 poems.
It's a narrative.
It just happened by accident.
It's a narrative of female experience.
Yeah, it is, That was the ones I happened to pick. And it seemed random at the time. But the only criterion I had was I really liked them. Now, we did discuss them.
Yeah.
I can remember went and discussed them, and we had a sort of little debates about a few of them. But essentially,
And over what length of time did this evolve?
I think that was like in 2019.
Yeah.
And then I started working on the illustrations. And I did start off making woodblock prints first. And then I found that the subject matter of the poems lent themselves to more detail than you can get in woodblock. So I had to kind of change tack. So I then did them in watercolor and then transferred them photographically into screen prints, so that I didn't lose the detail. I had to find a working method that actually worked.
Right.
To work with the poems.
Did you work collectively with the poems, or did you focus, say, on one at a time, or did you return to, say, a number of poems in the same time? How did you, what your process?
Well, how I unified it was I decided that I was going to do them not in colour. I didn't see them in colour, and also they're all done in watercolour. They're sort of drawn first and then they're done in watercolour. So that kind of unified them, even though they're all very different in their own way, because I thought as a set, I have to kind of try and unify them in some way. And I read the poems an awful lot, because it was quite hard. Like I'm not a trained illustrator, I come from a fine art background. So I did find it quite daunting, like what had I taken on? But I think I kept reading the poems all the time to try and find, like some of them had a couple of illustrations, like for instance, the Unlegendary Heroes. I did a couple of different women for that. And then I was doing a Creative Ireland project for County Westmeath, which was called the Family Album Project, where families came to the house and brought their photographs, and myself and the photographer documented them, and they've gone into the library as a resource. This one woman brought in these photographs, and in among them was this particular woman, and she kind of stuck in my head. And when the other two illustrations I'd done didn't work, I kept rereading the poem and thinking, what sort of women is Mary describing? Yeah. And I felt that this woman, if you see her clothes, she's not a young woman. She's carrying 2 buckets of water, obviously in an era when there was no running water, from a well. And I thought that fitted better into the kind of women that she was describing.
Yeah, a hint of a widow as well, perhaps, with the dark clothes that...
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. I just thought, you can see
the
that...
older lady.
She's strong.
She's strong, but,
very,
there's
strong.
not money there, do you know what I mean? And it's physical work, carrying the water. And I thought, it's the hardship of that very physical life that they lived back then. you know, in the 50s.
Did you go back to the family whose family member's photo inspired you?
Well, I have met them because I only live around the corner, you know what I mean?
Are they aware of the...
Well, not fully.
Okay.
I don't think they're really that interested in a way, you know what I mean? But
Well, that's
yeah, it is
very-
nice.
Yeah. And we might move on to another poem, Mary.
Okay.
How about...
Bewley's?
yeah,
Or
let's
is
talk.
that-
Let's
is that
the
all
Bewleys
right?
would be wonderful.
I'll tell you why. The
Yeah.
Bewley's
Yeah.
one is a poem that I had grave doubts about and I had even considered not putting it into the collection it was in at one point because I was afraid. I suppose sometimes I'm the kind of writer that is sometimes afraid of too much softness. Now, don't ask me why that is, or sentiment. Sorry, I'm trying to find the poem here as I
Last
speak.
one, I think, on the list, isn't it?
It should be.
Would you like
but
my copy?
could I have it, please? Yeah, it does. I seem to have left it out.
Yeah, there we go.
Oh, wait, here it is. Yeah. It's called Waiting Outside Bewley's, and it's in the 2015 collection, those April Fevers. And it's really about 4 generations: my grandmother, my mother, myself, and my daughter. And you know that word iconic is overused, but Bewley's really is iconic for Irish people. And Geraldine, by focusing on this poem, sort of made me really look at it again. And I love it now, of course. Waiting outside Bewley's. At that doorway, how often have I glided, smooth-hipped through crowds to see my mother wait with glossy packages on looped string. She never recognized me until I was before her, but pretended. I saw you, she proclaimed. You move like a hot knife through butter. And once, grandmother's shoe heel snagged on the cafe stairs, and she fell. We helped her up, reassembled her country dignity. Yesterday, I lolled in soft pause of coffee air just beside the counter. Shoppers streamed, magazine sellers changed coins. The bells of Clarendon Street Church rang out so that I, distracted, did not see this daughter hot knife her way along until she pulled up short before me, loops of hair damp with drizzle as she smiled. Was she grace or fate? What half-remembered female from the staircase of the past now gazed from her eyes at me? Inside, we ordered buns and coffee, settled down to pass the fragments of our stories, mouths generating some sweeter recognition, not just icing.
Beautiful. We all have memories of that, I think, and from childhood. I certainly do as a Dublin person as well, with family members and friends then, and admiring artists in the distance. And writers who so frequented Bewley's so,
And you see,
often.
it's a very democratic cafe, but yet it's also an art cafe. You know, you have the Harry Clark, the beautiful stained glass. It's Harry Clark, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, yeah.
The stained glass windows and this wonderful history, and all kinds of people stream through it. That's what I like.
Not quite the same now, but
No, it's not. but-
sadly. Can we talk a little bit about the printmaking process, Geraldine?
Yeah.
And if you could share with us a little bit about how you approached.
Yeah, well, you already mentioned I'm a member of the graphic studio. The graphic studio is on the North Circular Road in Dublin. It's had a few different homes, but it's the oldest print workshop, fine art print workshop in the country. And so I've been a member a long time. So it was good. So I could visualize in my head from the beginning as to how I could do this project. For that reason, except I did say I switched from woodblock printing because it wasn't quite the right medium to silk screen. And in recent years, the photographic process has been added, which has kind of attracted a lot of young people into printmaking who then kind of go back to the traditional almost. So what happens with the process is it allowed me to just do the watercolours at home first and then photograph them. And then they're photographed onto acetate, which is clear, and then that's photographed onto a silk screen, which is just a mesh screen, and it's got tiny little holes in it. And so you can pull the ink through it. So you've got your image on it, the rest of the screen is blocked out, and just the image, and so you can print it. So you can use colour if you want to, and you can layer the colours. Like you can make a screen for each colour if you want to, just separating them. I mean, it's a process that comes from, industry. Like T-shirts are printed like that, and so on. So that's mainly the process. But the advantage of the photographic side of it is that it can render exactly all my marks and so on. Like silk screen tends to be kind of flat, because you've got a screen and you pull it, and the ink comes down in a smooth layer. But with the photographic element introduced into it, it's picking up the marks of the brush, which you wouldn't ordinarily get really with screen printing. So it's very attractive from that point of view. So then the other side of it is the actual text of the poems. And I don't know if anybody's ever been to the National Print Museum, but the education officer there is a woman called Mary Plunkett, but she teaches letterpress. Letterpress was, when they used to set the old newspapers with wooden lettering, they'd metal tips, and you got a kind of a frame, and you built up the letters on it into words. That can now be done on the computer. So because we were screen printing, I wanted to screen print both. It's not done with the wooden letters. It's done photographically, but it's similar.
Okay.
It just doesn't leave a dent in the paper, whereas the wooden metal tip letters would have. And that's become really fashionable again. There's a lot of young artists who are using letterpress.
Turning to letterpress, yeah.
Yeah, there's now a department in National College of Art and Design dedicated to letterpress.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, which had died out, and a few people like Mary Plunkett had kept it alive, and now it's come back because there's an interest in the handmade and making books and so on.
Craft.
Yeah, so because I had to put the illustration with the poem, I screen print the two, all the text first on the 10 sheets, and then register the illustrations, where they're going to sit with the text. So that takes quite a while. It's kind of a little bit nerve-wracking because you're kind of trying to choose, okay, the poem is there, how close will the illustration come to it? And will people, if I pull the illustration too close, will people read the poem then? Where the eye is catching the illustration and it's interfering with you reading the poem and so on. So you have to register it in a way and hope for the best that that's the right place. There's enough white space between the two on the one sheet.
Right.
So then it's hand printed. So
and it's a fantastic part of the exhibition is that you've documented the process that's available to view upstairs.
Yeah, because oftentimes people don't know what you're talking about.
I would urge people to maybe return to the exhibition after our conversation and look at the process, look at the poem, look at the layout of the book, the beautifully presented.
Like the box, for instance. Because I'm interested in bookbinding, but I'm not a bookbinder. But that has also come back into fashion in a huge way.
Yeah.
So the young woman that is called Eilish Murphy that I commissioned to make the box. So she lives in Clare now, and she's got a little company called Folded Leaf, and she's won awards for her. She makes artist books and boxes for people. And so I went down and talked to her, and we talked about what the theme of the poems were and so on. She wants to see everything so that we could pick the colour of the box. Because when you open the box, we give the women in the poems the purple bishop colour, just a little bit of grandeur on the inside. you know, and then
Pop of colour.
yeah, and just a little
Yeah,
bit,
yeah.
you know, to elevate them. And then on the outside, even the title, that's in silver, you know, but it's a silvery grey to go with the grey, and that's the colour of the ink that's used in screen prints, you know. So there's a lot of kind of things that have to be
there were
worked
an
out.
awful lot of
Yeah,
things
there's
to
a
be
lot of
considered,
details that
yeah.
have to be
And
worked out. Like there's
we
nothing thrown together at the last minute.
We
You know.
talked ad nauseum,
Yes,
really,
yeah,
about,
yeah,
about
yeah.
the colour scheme for the box and things
Yeah, like
that.
everything,
and
everything.
Every little,
You know, you
little
might not
detail.
always be right about the
Yeah.
decisions
No,
you
but it
make,
was
but you
how
have
we
to make
were.
these
We were.
decisions.
Okay, will we take another poem,
Okay.
Mary?
Where do I see now? Which one? Any particular one that you would like?
Will we, how about those prostitutes in Cuba?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a 15-line poem, so it's relatively short. Those prostitutes in Cuba, and I used the old word rather than those sex workers in Cuba. I know sex workers is the correct term today, but this seemed right for the poem. And it was just a story that, it's based on, someone told me this, his experience of being in Cuba, and it set me thinking. So the poem isn't so much about prostitution as it is about registering how male and female sexuality is expressed differently, particularly maybe in later life, and what is permissible and what isn't. So that was really what I was at. And you have to also bear in mind that the person who told me of his adventures kept talking about Cuba's excellent health system as well. So anyway, those prostitutes in Cuba, and I was really happy that Geraldine chose this poem because I do like it. They were like two kittens, he said, snuggling up to him. They were fun and they liked him. I thought, against my own sex, how enviable his freedom to fall in with such company, then breakfast with them afterwards, heartily, admiring their health, their strong teeth, that vitality. It could never happen to a woman my age, two tiger men who would not wound, the three of us so human in a dusky room, sunlight stealing through the slats in colours from Matisse, the riotous world within and without. And I find that art references tend to crop up in my poems quite a lot, as I believe that in another life I might have been some kind of visual artist. And I'm addicted to Matisse and the way light falls in his paintings.
And Mary, thank you for that. In terms of collaborating, do you think that your sense of the visual sort of is something which urges you to work with other artists, say as a visual artist, or?
I think what I was thinking about this, Muireann, I think as artists grow older, we become more aware of the fact that actually, despite our different techniques, we're all focusing pretty much on the same themes, coming into life, like so birth, then we have love, sex, variants of that, and then we have passings away, literal death, the dying of certain parts of our lives, loss. And I think all artists are dealing with that. So I would like to work with a musician. I'd like to work with a composer for exactly the same reason. And you do experience a greater freedom as you grow older, and you want to cross over and work with other disciplines. And that's what attracted me very much to working with a visual artist as well. It's just, we're singing in a choir then, there's more than one voice. And yeah. I certainly find that very enabling or something. I love it.
And I think also there's the advantage of it reaching another audience. Maybe somebody who admires a musician will come to hear that musician, then be excited and delighted by hearing the writer in the performance or the visual artist. Geraldine, have you any?
Yeah, I have.
to add on
I
that?
just after thinking, I mentioned Dermot Healy, the writer, but somebody asked me one time, what was your influences growing up? Like, why did you become a painter or whatever, And like, when I was growing up, I never saw art. I mean, the nearest would have been probably the Stations of the Cross in the local church, that sort of thing. But the first time, it was probably like in my early days, maybe in first year in college or something like that. And I didn't really know how to make art that I was interested in or talk about what I was interested in, all right? And Dermot Healy brought out a book of short stories. And I think the reason I was also interested, because he was born in Westmeath and I'm from Westmeath, but he had a short story in it which described swimming in the canal. And I grew up next door to the canal, and that's where we swam. And I was bowled over by this, that one could make art about something local, something that you knew from your experience. So I think the reason I've always been interested in writers and poets, is because my first sense of making imagery came from a writer, that he gave me the possibility that you could do that. But he was a writer, not a painter. But of course his work was very visual as well. But so, I mean, when I look back, I'm not surprised that I asked Mary to work with him, because I've always loved literature and poetry.
But also, it's something that you mentioned earlier there in relation to meeting again in the Tyrone Guthrie Centre. The importance of artists meeting and sharing time, sharing bread, breaking bread, whatever, and the opportunity for conversations. I mean, I think we're realising, especially in the recent pandemic,
since the COVID,
the importance of that and the vitality that it gives us. Those conversations are so very important.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Tyrone Guthrie has been a massive success from that point of view, because over the years, the number of people I've met in other disciplines that I've done things with, work with, and so on, that would not have happened.
No.
Do you know what I mean? Because I often work mostly in isolation and don't have the opportunity to meet people. So the Tyrone Guthrie has been a godsend for artists of all types in Ireland, and it has kind of spawned so much work, hasn't it?
It has.
I mean,
it's speaking about I met Bridget Flannery, who's here in the audience today. That painter, visual artist. We met for the first time in Anna McCarrick as well, and got into conversation. And Bridget slipped one of her brochures under my door one evening, and it was stuff which just blew my mind away. And we've been in touch ever since. And I mean, we do, you have things, you do spark off certain people, and we enrich one another's work. And, in the same way that Geraldine has brought great richness to my practice, though she probably doesn't realise it. Bridget also has done that, and actually I used one of her images on the cover of my 2009 book, The Ark Builders. So that was, printed in England. It was lovely.
And I think that even within a community context, the vitality that artists bring to us. Mary, of course, you were the first writer in residence that I engaged here in Laois. 26 or 7 years ago.
It was 1994, I believe.
1994, yeah. And all the people that were inspired by those workshops and the book we produced, and the sense of, and of course all the visits back for the workshops and the Bealtaine festivals, and then the Leaves festivals also. And Geraldine, also how inspiring you've been to so many artists in Laois through your visits with the college, the FEC, the Further Education College in Abbeyleix. And we've students and lecturers here from Abbeyleix. We'd like to welcome them here today, because you've had so many encounters with them, and also the selection of artists for the group show, the annual group show.
Which has been really good, because I saw the person that won it that year has gone on to a fantastic career. Sharon Murphy.
Absolutely.
You know,
And Sharon, in turn, came to stay with us in
Yeah, yeah.
the art house in Stradbally, and we were able to develop those relationships also.
yeah.
We'll move on to another poem before we open to the floor. How about Muse?
Sure.
Yeah.
Muse was, well, it was partly inspired by the Ted Hughes poem, The Thought Fox, which is, of course, it's about that elusive fox, his poem, and which represents inspiration. And over the years, people have said to me, you know, mainly my husband, Martin, he'd say, I hear that Muse fella's knocking on your door today. You know, if he knows I'm in for a good day's work or something like that. And yeah, my muse is a male muse. I don't know in what form it is. But in this poem, it's in the form of a satyr or a goat-like creature. Pushing me. Muse. He lives in the wild brackens beyond the garden. Oh, by the way, I absolutely adore the image that goes with this, the detail on the horns of the goat-like creature. It is really fabulous, those curling horns. I'll start again. He lives in the wild brackens beyond the garden. I must stay alert, alone, resist the cosmetic clatter of an evening of too many useless acts. Pointless to tempt him with inscribed saucers of scallops, marbled blue cheese, or the omega of bone marrow. His appetite is not sated on such fine produce. As he springs silently, raw as a goat, through the rime frost and a chink in the porch window, I inhale the funk of him, sense his stealth, have known it all my life. He stands at my back, caresses my arm, the one that cramps with the pain of staying put, his one silver hoof tapping a line, a rhyme on the floorboards. He scarcely whispers, yet, bothered by his absence these sullen months, I hear him clearly. Hush now, such sibilant breaths. I have broken the fences, the safe arbours that restrained you, have torn down the walls that bound you to silence. I twitch to answer, accepting his hand curl around mine. In an instant, our fingers shift across the moonlit desk.
Good, it's good to be visited by the Muse.
Yeah, I can do it at
Certainly
the
is.
odd time. It doesn't come often enough, of course.
Now, we're going to open it up to the floor for questions and comments, but before we do so, I'd just like to advise you that for any of your Kildare friends, this exhibition transfers to Maynooth University Library on the 7th of April.
Yeah.
And so that is really wonderful, and you may even go and visit it in that location. As it will look different in the library. It's a beautiful place. I've done some work there with Mary Burke, the artist, and
Mary Burke. Yeah.
and Mary Corcoran, the head of sociology there in Maynooth University. And it's great that you're heading to Maynooth. And Mary has some books available for sale, and she will sign them for you. And we have, of course, the artworks are for sale upstairs. And
Could I also add that, you know, we're hoping to, this is a limited edition of 10, and so our long-term hope is that it will be, these will be purchased by institutions who have it with a permanent collection. So, price on inquiry.
thank you very much, Mary. So Michelle is going to, she has the mics, and we'd like you to use the mic when you're speaking your question or your comment, because it can often be very difficult to hear otherwise. And we, Michelle, we ask people just to quickly say their name or where they're from. Thank you. So is there anybody that would like to pass a comment? There's somebody down here, Michelle. Bridget.
Hello, pardon? Oh, I can put them, okay. Oh, freedom. Bridget Flannery, I just want to ask Mary and Geraldine that, you're talking about the muse. What happens when the muse doesn't come?
Oh, God.
Yeah.
You go mad, Bridget.
A lot of baking gets done.
Yes.
What do you do to feed those fallow times?
I do a lot of reading, a lot of walking. I sometimes will go over to Nisheer on the Aran Islands, where I lived at one time. Things like that. Like I try to, enrich myself. Although it does drive me mad, if you know what I mean. You probably know what it's like. Sometimes it doesn't work either. Sometimes you have to wait. Like certain things catch me, like I might have an idea, and if it doesn't last for very long in my head, I know it's not worth pursuing. But there are some things that kind of are in the back of your mind, and they keep knocking on the door all the time. And I find if they keep persisting over a good few months, there's something in it that I need to pursue. So that's kind of, but I do find that quite difficult when I'm waiting for what is the muse, I suppose, But at this stage, I suppose I've been at it so long, I know what's going on. Whereas when I was young, it was kind of different, it was very, very frustrating where you'd kind of abandon the whole career nearly, waiting for the muse. I suppose the thing is, I know there's a lot of people from Abbey Leaks who are involved in the arts here this morning, and I think finding your voice, it's a hard thing, but finding things that you're genuinely interested in rather than what catches your eye today, it'll be maybe something different tomorrow. Those usually, for me anyway, don't make good art. I don't know, people have different methods. I don't like to kind of prescribe how to do it.
I know when I'm empty and nothing's, it really, and I don't like that feeling of being totally empty. And but I would do probably deliberately stimulating the things that I enjoy. Obviously, it's important to nourish. So I actually would go to mostly galleries I'm familiar with: the National Gallery, the Hugh Lane, and a few others around town, around Dublin. And I do find revisiting paintings I'm familiar with is very soothing somehow. It calms my mind if I'm agitated because I can't write. And you're not an ever-flowing spout, so there are times when you just can't write or paint. I would go out into nature. That's really important for me. Not in any romantic way. I just put on my walking boots and I'll go and walk in a forest. I do a harmless bit of gardening, and I like to bake. And those things sometimes help me. The baking is tactile and just, it's very, very, it allows thoughts to come in.
Pauline Dunn from Portlaoise. You got kind of cut off because you found the poem in the end, but you said you'd liked to avoid sentimentality in your poems sometimes.
Yes. Where are you, Pauline?
I'm over here.
Oh, yeah.
I was just wondering if you had any more to say about that, because you did kind of get cut off and it was kind of an interesting thing to mention.
Yeah, well, it's, it says more maybe about my unsentimental nature probably, and but I do try and find a passage between outright sentimentality. I dislike the rose tinted, but you also have to allow for feeling and sometimes softness. And a lot of the poetry that one can read in the contemporary world it can be harsh and perhaps unknowingly, of course, it's judgmental. And as my poem Wicklow is, that is a judgment on whatever man or men are wandering around who have murdered these women. So I'm trying to steer a passage between the two, and that's what goes. It's my personality and temperament to try and do that, and that was the reason why I was almost going to leave the Bewley's poem out of the collection. And then people really responded to it. And I thought, see, I'm typical of my generation. I have to remember that it's okay to let feeling out. And I think that's what was going on there.
Hi, Circa from Fort Leash over here. I was just wondering, do either of you have like a favorite piece up in the exhibition? Like whether it's a poem or like a print? Like do you have like a preferred or like something you want in your home?
Well, I love the poem Unlegendary Heroes in particular. It actually makes me cry when I read it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what it is about it. Maybe Mary can explain. Maybe it's the structure of it or something, but I get to a certain part in it and it always has the same, I feel choked. Okay. My favourite illustration, I like the crone a lot.
I love her too.
I don't know why, she's kind of bold.
Yeah.
I love the heron.
Oh yeah, well I like the heron too,
And
yeah.
the
yeah.
detail on the bird, you know. But I do like the Unlegendary. I think that's the perfect match. And that, you know, that poem, sometimes when I read that poem still, people are inclined to titter for the first few stanzas of it.
Oh, are they?
Because, yeah, they do. I've heard people laughing.
Are you going to read it today?
Only if there's
Go
time. I
on.
don't want to.
We have
Would you like her to read it? I'd love to.
Would we have
All
time?
right. I'd
Yeah,
like to hear
yeah, I
Mary
don't-
read it.
I think
All right.
yeah.
It was inspired when I read a little excerpt from a 1938 folklore survey, which recorded the local people who occupied South Ulster and that landscape. And in this particular survey, there were no activities of women recorded. And I thought, how strange. And now this was in an atlas called Landscapes of South Ulster by P.J. Duffy. He's a former geographer at Maynooth. And I began to think about this idea of life passing through places. And, you know, I was born in the mid-50s. And so in the 50s and 60s in rural Ireland, there was a great deal of physical labour going on that was carried by men and women. So, but from the folklore survey, this is a little taste of it. Patrick Farrell of Lacca, who was able to mow 1 acre and 1 rood Irish in a day. Tom Gallagher, Cornamuckla, could walk 50 Irish miles in 1 day. And it proceeds on then to lighter stuff. Edward Monaghan, Anna, who could stand on his head on a pint tumbler or on the rigging of a house. So, but I thought I have to provide a fictional inventory of women. And this is what I wrote it in Anna McCarrick, actually. So it's I think the first and second stanza does cause titters sometimes, but I didn't think it was funny at all. Kathleen McKenna, Anagola, who was able to wash a week's sheets, shirts and swaddling, bake bread and clean the house all of a Monday. Birdie McMahon of Falkland walked to Monaghan for a sack of flour 2 days before her 8th child was born. Septa Duffy, Glennon, very good at sewing, embroidered a set of vestments in 5 days. Mary McCabe of Derrynshallowg, who cared for her husband's mother in dotage, fed 10 children, the youngest still at the breast during haymaking. Mary Conlon Tully Ree, who wrote poems at night. Assumpta Meehan, Tony Garvey, saw many visions and was committed to the asylum. Martha McGinn of Amy, who swam Cornamundon Loch in 1 hour and a quarter. Marita McHugh, Foxhole, whose sponge cakes won first prize at Cloncaw Show. Miss Harper, Corley, female problems rarely ceased, pleasant in ill health. Patricia Curley, Corlat, whose joints ached and swelled though she was young, who bore 3 children. Dora Houston, Stranani, died in childbirth, aged 14 years. Last words, Mammy, oh Mammy. Rosie McCrodden, Ahabog, noted for clean boots, winter or summer, often beaten by her father. Maggie Traynor, Dona, got no breakfasts, fed by the nuns, batch loaf with jam, the best speller in the school. Phyllis McCrudden Knockafubble, who buried 2 husbands, reared 5 children and farmed her own land. Anne Moffat of Ena, who taught people to read and did not charge. Thank you.
It's really good.
You know, so like people are so heroic in our day-to-day lives. We still are, but nobody gets, you don't want credit, but people are. And so that's why I called it Unlegendary Heroes. In our day-to-day struggles, we're not the stuff that goes into legends. But so these wonderful people of other generations where life was so much more physical, you know, and sometimes it was painful. Not all, you know, that's what was in my mind, really.
I think it's really captured so well.
Thank you.
Hi, Lorraine Walsh. I just had a question for Geraldine there. You said that you, this was an illustrations project for you, really, and I was just wondering how to compare to how you normally work. Like, was it different to how you approach the project?
Yeah, it was. But I tend, like all the projects that I do, they all kind of, like what's the same about my work is that the projects are different. You know what I mean, I don't know whether you'd pick up whether I had a particular style that you would say they're mine, you know. Like when I find subject matter that interests me, I usually do a lot of research around it. And then I find, like I think about what way would that be best presented in, if you get my drift, you know. So if I felt, well, I suppose it's because I do a lot of printmaking as well as painting and drawing. So I can kind of go between a couple of different mediums. You know, I sort of say to myself, now, would that look better if I did it as a wood block, or would that look better if I did it as a painting? Like, would the subject matter fit better in that medium? Like at the moment, I'm making a huge big wood block for the Fleadh in Mullingar, which is all about portraits of past musicians, you know. And I saw it as like a big poster from the 50s, you know, in those colours that they used and so on. That's like over the years, that's the way my work has kind of developed, rather than it always been about landscape or something, you know. Although I have done landscape exhibitions as well. You know, I'm not saying one's better than the other or anything like that. Yeah, and I like to take a particular subject matter and run with it, you know. So like when I was in Inisheer, I did landscape because that's what was all around me, you know. But since I've been back in Westmeath, and then I did a residency in Paris, and there's lovely patterns on the floor, and I was interested in emigration, you know, like all the people who came to stay there for their education and so on. So, you know, I kind of would look at, you know, find the theme that interested me and research it, and then make work that I felt was appropriate to the theme, and find the medium that's best served in, you know. Doesn't always work out, but...
Hi, I'm Ava, and I'm actually in final year of NCAD as well. I was just wondering, like, say, for yourselves, you kind of touched on it there briefly, actually, in the last answer there, but I mean, as a poet and an artist, like, do you find, say, that, like, you would kind of always resort to, like, say, following the same theme or the same type of work? Like, not, like, in medium, but in themes of, like, say, womanhood and Irish work throughout, like, say, your career as an artist and a poet, or would that kind of change, do you think?
Do you want to, Lion?
Well, let's see. You know, I mentioned there earlier that I believe there are only four main themes, and that most of us pursue variations of those. You know, the fourth one I didn't mention was really landscape and the pastoral, or, you know, landscape. It can be cityscape as well, but apart from birth and love and death and that. I don't consciously do it, but I'm probably pushed by experience and what's going on around me. So none of my collections follow through in one fixed theme at all. I'm a lyric poet primarily, so there is a range of things, but they'd be moving in and out of those themes. And certainly in my last collection, Massacre of the Birds, nature and the environment are fairly strong in it, you know. But it depends. Geraldine?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. Like, I would ask myself that, like, now that I can look back. I think, is there any common theme? There probably, you know what I mean? I think what I'm interested in probably influences what I go for, but I have, like when I started out from college, I was a long time involved in community arts, you know, and I think that kind of has always kind of stayed with me, in that I'm interested in topics that maybe other people are interested in. Like the first show that I did was about, I found a collection of emigrant letters when I was living in America, and I was an emigrant myself. And so I did an exhibition about the Irish emigration to America from the 1840s to the 1830s. And then that led on to something else, which I did for Kilmainham Jail. So there's, you know, I don't know, like, you don't consciously, as you say, pick things, but you do find after a while when you look back that there's some things that are similar in your work, that you go for certain things. I'm very interested in history as well, and that crops up in the work quite a bit as well.
You had an amazing piece in Kilmainham that I saw years ago, a big long piece.
Oh yeah, that came after the emigration thing. I was invited to, I did remade what I thought were fictional registers for the prison, and because like mass emigration kind of started in Ireland after the famine, and so I looked at the year of 1847 in the National Archives to see what crimes people committed, and most of them were based on, there were minor crimes like rooting at potatoes with intent to steal, or breaking a pane of glass to steal a loaf of bread. So I remade a prison register, and I put in the crimes from 1847 in it, you know. Yes. So I've always had an interest in social history and history, yeah. That would be kind of common to my work.
Minor misdemeanors.
Well, I mean, the other thing is I'm interested in the truth. I wasn't going to make it up myself.
No, it's social justice.
Yeah, it was so I went to the National Archives and I found the registers from Kilmainham Jail of that time, and I went through it, and I think there was maybe one murder, but the rest was all food poverty.
Yeah, and also providing employment, providing workers for other places in the case of Australia or.
Well, about transportation. I did actually go to Tasmania and attend the first convict conference, history conference in Tasmania ever, back in, 1998. Like, they have found it very difficult to acknowledge that history, you know, and I did intend when I came back to do an exhibition about it, but something else cropped up, you know. But, so history and social history, probably coming from the community arts, period of my life when I left college, you know, because when I left college there was very little employment for artists, or very little structures there, you know, so we had to set up quite a lot of things to create an audience, you know, so I think that has influenced my life a lot.
Okay. Sorry, sorry, there's a gentleman there with the mic. Sorry, I beg your pardon.
Yeah. I'd like to come back to the Unlegendary Heroes poem, and wondering, how did you pick the names, and were you not afraid that they would have been recognizable names?
No, I just made the names up and randomly selected parish names. So, I mean, there would be some of the names I would have been familiar with, or surnames from around, where I grew up. I mean, McKenna there are so many McKennas, like in Monaghan and South Ulster. McMahon is a common name, but there were, Duffy, McCabe, Conlon, they're all sort of Monaghan names, but there's so many of those families I'd never think of that. I sort of I mean, most people wouldn't be aware of this, but I took names that represented not just Catholics, but also Protestant culture up there. So maybe Houston, you know, for example, or Moffat. And only a local will recognise that sort of thing. But I did want to represent all kinds of people that things are happening to, you know.
Come back to you saying
No.
Okay.
That book, it came out in 1998, so far so good.
Okay, thank
Thanks,
you.
Ma.
Mary.
Yes, Arthur.
I loved your poetry.
Thank you.
I think Bewley's is my favourite.
Thank
Isn't
you
that
very much.
interesting?
Yeah, that is, yeah.
That's
But
really
just to get to the point, what you're doing is the opposite to the writing an ekphrastic poem. Isn't that right?
The opposite to it. Yes.
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 So I'm just coming to Geraldine. Because when you're writing an ekphrastic poem, I suppose you have more liberty to interpret the painting. So I'm just wondering, did you see anything in Mary's poem that wasn't maybe even meant by Mary or obvious to the reader? Or did you reinterpret anything, you know, in her poems or give them a fresh perspective?
Well, I suppose when Mary was reading the poem, I was thinking, why was I attracted to that poem? There was a couple of reasons, and nothing to do with Mary's, you know, experience of it. But I was in art school in Dublin, and I spent a lot of my life in Bewley's because we were in Kildare Street and Clarendon Street, just around the corner. So I have great affection for the place. And just shortly before I read the poem, my mother died. So I got the thing of the generations of, you know, parents or mothers and how important they are, and missing them, and seeing that relationship of the generations, you know, and you moving up the level. Like I really liked that part, but I found it quite poignant where, you know, Mary saw herself as the daughter in the poem initially, and then she's waiting for her daughter, the passing of time. But like, you'll never know what, say, Mary meant by the poem fully. Like, I think you'll always bring your own thing to the poem. You know what I mean? Yeah, and like that thing of standing outside waiting for somebody at Bewley's. Well, I certainly recognise that because I spent years doing that, you know, waiting for people, meeting them, you know, because it was such a great meeting place. You see people coming. So, you know, I really identified with that, you know, where you see your friend or your daughter or whatever coming towards you, and, you know, how nice that is. You know what I mean? I get that experience, you know. So that's similar to what, I'd say, what Mary was experiencing, but that thing of suddenly now she's the mother and the daughter is coming, you know, I quite like that.
Yeah, and I suppose also, Geraldine, like when I looked at some of your images afterwards, a couple of them took me by surprise. And you see, everyone, once you write something or once you paint something, the viewer or the reader is totally at liberty to see it any way they like. I think that's it, you know, because that's completing the circle of the dialogue, probably. So, for example, in the poem, her interpretation of the poem, Those Prostitutes in Cuba, what was, in my mind, I was seeing a much more battered up sort of guy than the very attractive looking bloke that she has there with the two women. I think he's quite attractive anyway. But it wasn't what I envisioned when I was writing that poem. And the woman in the Bewley's poem is much more countrified looking than I had imagined her to be.
Oh,
Or
yeah,
it didn't
okay.
matter one way, it doesn't matter. It's neither here nor there.
Yeah.
The point is, it is different from what I was thinking as I was writing. And that is the completion of the dialogue, I think, in art sometimes. You know, or there's this circle. And I like that process.
Except that it is difficult when I pick the poem, like, because you're thinking about what will Mary think about this, And, you know, how close is it to the poem, even though it's visual? You know what I mean? So, and what will you leave out, and what will you put in, and so on. And then, you know, that you're bringing an interpretation that maybe the poet won't like at all. You know, all that sort of thing. So,
I'm so sorry.
well, you'll never be
Thought I'd
forgiven.
switch that off.
Yeah.
Now, there one more contribution there.
First of all, was it Cuba calling? No. So Monica Ba, so an old friend of Geraldine's, and just great to see 3 strong women there this morning, and it's great to be out and about, number one. But number two, I suppose the question I would have, that while I'm afraid I won't be in a position to be asking for the price of the big publication, I would be wondering, is there, you know, are there maybe some publishers in the audience, or is there a way of publishing it as a regular book that people could get their hands on with the illustrations and the 10 poems?
Well, it's interesting, Monica, because my neighbour, who is the photographer who photographed stuff for me, his wife said, oh, wouldn't it make a very nice small book? But like, for instance, we've been spending the last year trying to raise money to make a documentary, because we were asked by a university abroad, would they'd love to have it documented for Irish Studies Department.
In Sao Paulo University.
Yeah. So, you know, we started off with no money, and we still don't have any money. So let's see what will happen, you know.
Yeah.
I think
that's a good idea.
It's a lovely idea.
I like the idea.
And if somebody wants to do it, we certainly would be delighted.
Yeah.
And I suppose it leads into maybe a comment and maybe a question as well, just around infrastructure for artists and how they're supported, you know, and how, you know, this place has always been great, Dunamase Arts Centre, you know, and there are a number of places that have been great, but sadly there are a number of places which are being funded by the Arts Council which actually haven't been so good. And I think there is something for all of the young people in particular who are looking at entering into the arts world, that hopefully it will be a better place for them, and it is getting better for our generation, I think, as we moved along. But it can be tricky, and Muireann has been great as well in Laois. So.
Yeah, no question about it.
Well, I think that we've been very fortunate this morning to have such a wonderful celebration of Unlegendary Heroes, and the magnificent work that these 2 artists have undertaken and shared with us their thoughts, and such an enriching experience on this February morning. I'd like to thank you both very much, and I'd also like to advise you that for Seachtain na Gaeilge in the middle of March, we have Rita Kelly, another former writer-in-residence, in conversation with Cliona Ní Chonaill, broadcaster and producer from RTE. She was with us last year on the Leaves programme as the curator, and we will be publicising that in the coming days. So thank you to everybody. Thank you, Nick, and thank you, Michelle, and thank you very much to our wonderful audience as well.
Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you for coming.
For everything.
Thank you, Mary.